Good afternoon and welcome to the Oxford Biodynamics Full Year Results webinar. We're delighted to have with us today Jon Burrows, the CEO, Matthew Wakefield, the Chair, and Paul Stockdale, the CFO. I'm now going to hand over to Matthew Wakefield to start today's presentation.
Thanks, Alex, and welcome everyone to this afternoon's webinar. In fact, we've got record numbers of attendees today, and I think that reflects just what interest there is in OBD and the transformative year that we've had in 2023. That was, including the launch of our PSC test, the completion of our lab in America, bolstering up the management team, and really just being on the verge of commercialization of our technology, which is gathering a pace. I'm not going to go on and steal Jon's thunder because I know he's got a lot to say. So I'm going to hand over to Jon, who'll give you the details of where we are today and where we're going.
Thank you, Matthew. And good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are. I'm actually blown away. We have 190 people signed up. That to me is incredible. But I'm also really looking forward to telling you what we've been doing in the last year or so. And just to summarize it before I start, we've got two products that are on the market. We've got a really solid pipeline coming behind it. And we are spending every ounce of our cash and personnel resource, I believe, to make this happen in the market. And I want to tell you about how we're doing that. So here's our disclaimer. And let me just give everybody a flavor. I know a lot of people are familiar with us, but so Oxford Biodynamics, we've been on the AIM since 2016. We are genomic experts, and we're increasingly being recognized as global experts in 3D genomics. I've just come back from a week at JP Morgan where the conversations are at a completely different level about what we're doing, how we're doing it. And the understanding after 2 or 3 years of conversations with these people is that, okay, we're here to stay, and they get that we're contributing very well into the marketplace. We've obviously been the recipient of 2 PACT awards, which have been very validating for us in the US. Our CSO and founder, Dr. Akulovich, Sasha, is a member of the foundation of the NIH Biomarker Steering Committees. And we have marketed products. And that's the promise that me and my team made for the company beginning, well, at the end of 20 and beginning in 21. And that is, let's be masters of our own destiny. Let's get clinical products from what we can do. Let's go out and start building a marketplace around 3D genomics. No, it's going to be hard. It's a big ask. We are doing it. And you can see we've got the checkpoint inhibitor response test on the market. We're selling it in the US and the UK. We have the reimbursement code. We have Bupa, who've covered it in the UK. We brought on board at the end of last year the prostate screening episwitch test. We already have a live reimbursement code. And we have a very strong pipeline of tests that are becoming market ready. I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I'm excited about the interest that has come to us around those for especially colorectal cancer and canine biology. But I wanted to start with a quick snapshot of FY23 from October of 22 to September 23. Our CPT code for CERT went live in October 22. In FY23, we processed 516 tests. That's up from 79 in 22. Definite good growth. We've achieved strong reimbursement against our list price for the test, which is just under $5,000. In October, we completed a 9.3 million fundraise. I'm going to jump forward. In August of 23, we also completed a £6.1 million, pound fundraise. 15 million pounds raised over the period. I'm very, very thankful of that, to the strong support we have from our investors. And I also think that you see that we spent it very, very wisely. I just want to make a comment here. I was watching what we call the wild card football games here in the US for the Super Bowl playoffs. And every ad that came up was directed towards a man. Makes sense, right? Men watch football. There were things like ED ads, or ads for immuno checkpoint inhibitors, or ads for the next truck that you want to buy. But the point I want to make is this: each one of those ad campaigns for just that weekend cost well north of $5 million. And that's what it takes in the US market to actually get into people's mindset. Now, in February of 23, the Prostagram publication highlighted the strengths of PSE. We made a decision to go put that on the market. And then in May, we got a second PACT award around CERT for the hyperprogressive disease, which is a very important consideration with IO. As I said, we completed the fundraise. By September of 23, 6 months after we started, we had a clear certified lab running and ready to support the launch, which we did, of the PSE test for prostate. We did it early. Just want to let that sink in. That's an amazing amount of work that's been done by a company like ours. It actually parallels what companies with a lot more resources than us do. And then post year end, between the end of the year and now, we announced the Bupa partnership, where they've put out coverage policy for CERT and are now embarking on an internal marketing campaign to get their doctors to adopt it and use it so that they can use the information to best serve their patients. In November of 23, I hired Dr. Steve Arrivo. I'll tell you more about him, to lead the PSE vertical, because we need some horsepower there. In December of 23, I hired Dr. Ryan Mathis to lead the CERT vertical. I'll also tell you about that in detail. January 1st, our CPT code for PSE went live. And since we launched that test, we've actually sold 144 PSE orders. And this is really through our initial virtual direct-to-customer web sales. Dr. Arrivo is going to build on that. And to make sure everybody understands, we've actually run 770 CERT orders since its launch through the end of 2023. So let me just give you the background for those that need a refresh and the new people that are seeing us for the first time. We are taking 3D genomics as a clinical biomarker modality into the clinic. And what you see on this slide is the general dogma that everybody is taught in biology in the Western world about the supply chain of DNA through RNA to protein. And this is the basis of next-gen sequencing and the tests by next-gen sequencing that seek to look at how the DNA, the RNA, and the protein are actually determining what's going on clinically with you. And they can't do it. It's a surrogate readout. It's not predictive. And so what then happened is people started saying, well, let's look at the epigenetics, because it's not just enough to look at your genetics. Let's take a look at how your genetics is being determined by your environment. So they looked at acylation, histones, etc., along that axis. And again, it added more noise and more information, but it didn't add a lot of predictability or prognostication ability. And then along came the Oxford University lab of Dr. Akulechev, 3D genomics being pushed to its hilt. And whoops, this is what we end up with. the actual link to clinical phenotype is through the genomic architecture and the molecular regulatory network that it puts in place. And you can probe that by looking in the blood at the white blood cells around the blood. This is what we're doing. Nobody else is doing this. And we have it very well protected in terms of patents. Not only that, is that we are first to market. I just want everybody to understand what we're doing. We're not selling a test. We're selling multiple tests. We're building a brand new market in molecular testing. And the way we've brought this new dimension is we've said, okay, now we've mapped this 3D genome. We've built an array system where we can discover and interrogate and ask what's going on. And then what we've done is we've put this into a database that's supported by AI and machine learning that has now 1 billion plus data points in it. And we use that information to build these tests. This is why we can achieve sensitivities, specificities, accuracies that are way above traditional NGS. What we've also done is we've looked at this massive pipeline of robust clinical prototype tests that have been built over the last 10 to 15 years. And we've said, okay, let's put them on the market. And we've started with CERT and PSE. We'll talk in detail about those. We've also, though, got a very important product development pipeline that is starting to come more and more into focus, which we'll talk about as well. The way we've done this is we've gone beyond product development into what we call clinical assay and really putting it into the hands of the doctors. So we can do sampling, extraction, amplification, analysis, and give a clinical report from 2 mL of blood in a standard blood collection tube in 5 days or less from receipt of the sample. This is exactly what you have to do in this market with tests. So let's talk about the checkpoint inhibitor response test. I'm very, very happy about this test. It's what brought me to the company. As you see on this slide, we're first to market. It's clinically validated. It's fast turnaround. It tells you which patients will respond. The Kaplan-Meier curve is does not lie. And let me just take you through this. This patient, this is an example of the type of use that we're seeing in the hands of the early adopters, and we are now trying to leverage into the general oncologist population. This gentleman, Andre, has a very low IHC PDL1, 2%. That's the FDA test that's approved for checkpoint inhibitors. On the basis of that, he is not going to be given a checkpoint inhibitor. However, the CERT test that his doctor ran showed he had a high probability of response. He was treated and a complete response was observed. Then you can look on the other side of the coin at this lady, Maggie. She had a very high PDL1, 90%. She should be responding if that test is actually correct. The CERT said low probability of response. She was treated, no response was observed. The subtlety here is that when a doctor gets a high PDL1 and does not see a response, if they use CERT and they see there's a low probability, they can be very much more confident to take that patient off that drug and put them on something else sooner rather than later. So what is going on with our CERT sales right now? This graph on the right-hand side basically shows you, if you go through June, where we last gave the numbers, there was a definite effect with our clinical advisory boards. And following that in the summer, the sales were flat as expected and actually decreased back to a level prior to June. But in October, November, and December, we did not see the type of growth that we'd have expected. I think this was actually impacted by a very unforeseen leave of absence by one of our strongest reps. They're now back on board, but we saw that our orders in our primary geography and the ability to run clinical ad boards have been affected. This has put us behind probably 2 to 3 months. But as you can see from the numbers at the bottom, we did not lose our foundation, and that's very, very important. So what are we doing? Well, it also shows that we're vulnerable with a small sales team and with the modest funding that we have. So in December of 23, I brought Dr. Ryan Mattis on board. And Ryan is a physician who has clinical expertise, but also an impressive background in BD and running commercial sales teams for innovative healthcare products. He brings an added level of gravitas to the peer-to-peer approach, doctor on doctor, that we know is very effective. And so what is really going on here, if you look at this graph that I'm showing you, to date, certs primarily been being sold in this area where the yellow and the red are, early adopters. And what we need to do is we need to move across this chasm with everything we know into the early majority now of doctors out there. So Dr. Mattis is breaking down the analytics from the first 750 plus tests that we have to understand how to leverage it. And he will refine our speaker programs, our ad boards to continue to take care of the peer-to-peer sales strategy. He's also implementing rigorous sales training along with a national conference strategy. Now, I put these in there very, very, a lot of detail. What I want to just show you on this slide is that Keytruda, Opdivo, Jemperli, Bavencio, Trem, or atezolizumab are very expensive. The health, economic, and outcomes research data that we have just from the first nearly 800 tests is massive for us. And he is actually analyzing this and putting that story together to help us. Also, what I want to bring your attention, on Boxing Day this year, this article came out in the Wall Street Journal. It basically is asking, when is the best time to stop immunotherapy? Because we're overusing checkpoint inhibitors and giving it too much, and we need to know when to stop it. The very first thing that Ryan did was get in touch with the Wall Street Journal and these authors and start that narrative about, we have the answer for this. Let's talk. The other thing that he brings to the table is his understanding of the National Comprehensive Cancer Network, the NCCN. These guidelines and compendia play a major role in coverage policies, but what also day to day, doctors use those as the algorithm to check against as they work up and treat a patient. There are 33 cancer centers in the US under the NCCN Alliance, and it publishes its own peer-reviewed journal. Getting into their mindset and working with them to bring us into the guidelines and bring us into their network hospitals will be a huge move forward for the company. So the top-down sales strategy that Dr. Mattis has started working on includes capturing the large accounts which we can identify through who's been using the test in the first 770 uses, leveraging these analytics also as real-world evidence to build out the health economic story and strengthen our position with payers, GPOs, and guidelines. The NCCN guideline prioritization and integration that I've just talked about, building a conference footprint that is focused on those groups that primarily from the analytics are using our test. And I can tell you it's pretty interesting. The majority of our tests are used by lung cancer doctors, but there are also strong groups that we didn't expect in liver and pancreas that are using it. And we need to be able to capitalize on that. Of course, working with patient advocacy to accelerate the understanding of this and get it into the public eye are very important too. So that's what I'm excited about for CERT and how we can move on this year and really start to capture the market that we know is there. Now let's talk about the EPIS-Rich prostate screening test, PSE. I put this slide up because I think it's very important that everybody, if you walk away with no other information, you understand what we're showing here. First of all, the continuity of care for a patient goes along here. Usually a PSA test, and in the US, a biopsy, maybe an MRI. In the UK, MRI is being touted as maybe before biopsy. If you look at the numbers, and this is why it's astounding to me, by the way, that we need to run more studies and gain more evidence about what the right tests are, because we already know the data's here, I'm showing it to you. We know that PSA is 55% accurate. We know that PSE has boosted this and across the board given us a very, very powerful tool in front of biopsy, which when it's done is actually pretty good if you have cancer. But the problem is, if you use PSA, 75% of the people going here don't have cancer and they just have a destructive, invasive procedure. MRI, on the other hand, is only 49% accurate. Highly sensitive if there's something wrong with you, but really not the way to go when you've got PSA out on the market. So let's go through the PSE story really pretty quickly. February of 23, the publication that told us about this data was actually presented, published in Cancers. It shows that 75% of men sent to biopsy have no cancer detected. That's what we're all about. And this means that because our accuracy's gone up to 94%, it means that our test can make sure that 19 out of 20 men will get a correct diagnosis of cancer or suspicion of cancer or no cancer before biopsy. That's very important in terms of how the health economics runs and on the taking care of your patient. We know there's a massive market in the US with close to 50 million men over the age of 50, 10 million men over the age of 50 in the UK. So what we began in March of 23 and April was to build and validate the lab. By September, we'd got a certified lab up and running. We launched the test. We started the virtual marketing campaign direct to customer. We were notified in October of a CPT code being granted. It went live on Jan 1. We've hired Dr. Arrivo to lead this vertical. And to date, we've had 144 orders. So who is Dr. Arrivo? Steve is a really highly successful person in the business of science and medicine. I've worked with him. He's incredibly good at what he does. Over his career through Merck and Pfizer and Ventana and Biodynamics and Caprion on Cell Carter, he has always grown the business and pushed it to a new level. He's recognized as that commercial leader. His specific focus for us will be to grow the sales in the US market, implementing effective sales and marketing strategies above and beyond the direct to consumer. And he's able, if you look at this graphic, to take the story that 19 in 20 men, if you use PSE, will get the correct diagnosis. And more so, only 1 in 20 will be sent forward for a needless biopsy. Very, very important. So Dr. Arrivo has a very big job with modest and limited resources compared to comparator companies that are in the market. For the investors that are on the call, I would definitely ask you to go and look at the budgets that comparator companies like Guardant, Exact, Foundation, Freenome, Caris, NeoGenomics, Myriad, Natera can bring to bear on products that aren't as good as ours. Steve's implementing the 2024 plan by analyzing and evolving the DTC approach, importantly, engaging partners for national distribution, and these are the big companies that are able to do blood testing and get it out nationally on a huge level. Selling access to larger accounts by beginning with the concierge groups and then expanding into the IDNs. These are people like Kaiser Permanente, etc., the big healthcare systems and the GPOs, the general purchasing organizations that support the activities of big hospitals. He's crafting and distilling the health economics story for PSE, driving awareness and utilization with the KOLs. And I want you to understand, it's not just KOLs knowing about it. We need KOLs using it. And of course, attending conferences, collaborating with advocacy groups, and pushing for inclusion into the NCCN guidelines. So the last thing I would like to talk about is the third-party interest that's been shown recently in our deployable pipeline assets. And just to look at the two that I've highlighted here, colorectal bowel cancer is something which is market ready for us now, but we're not going to launch that. We've got our hands full with CERT, we've got our hands full with prostate. There's also this canine test for dogs. It's not our area of expertise. It's a great product, but it's something that we're going to need to partner and potentially monetize. So let me give you a little bit more background. For colorectal, we have a test that we're now calling the EpiSwitch NST, which stands for no stool. The reason for that is because the market leading test is a stool test. And we believe that a blood test can capture the 90% of the market that the stool test doesn't. But in a nutshell, colorectal cancer begins with growths called polyps. And you need to detect and remove those polyps as a way to prevent cancer. Now, the gold standard is to do a colonoscopy, but this is invasive. People do not like the bowel preparation that occurs. They don't like going under anesthesia, and it comes with the possibility of harm through bleeds or perforations. The test that is leading the market behind colonoscopy is only 42% accurate in finding large polyps. And when you don't remove these large polyps, your risk for cancer goes way up. What we've done is we've built a liquid biopsy blood test for screening, and the EpiSwitch NST can detect the presence of polyps prior to colonoscopy with an accuracy of 83%. It also has a sensitivity of 96%, a specificity of 90%, and is 94% accurate in determining the presence or absence of stage 1 or stage 2 cancer. We are in active conversations with market players who really would like this type of product in their pipeline. There are early day conversations where people are getting to know what it is and how the heck we can have such a high set of metrics, which is obviously based on our modality not being the same old NGS. Those are continuing, and we'll inform you how they go as things develop. On the specific for canine blood test, which is called EpiSwitch SCB, which I affectionately call Scooby, what we've been able to do is build a test that has high accuracy between 82 and 89% across all lymphomas, sarcomas, and melanoma-derived cancers in dogs. You can see from this graphic that those are the majority of cancers that these beautiful animals actually succumb to. There is a test on the market called the oncocanine blood test. It's only 55% accurate, and it only calls lymphomas and sarcomas and no subtypes. It's not utilized very much. We can actually leverage this, but it's not our business. So we are talking and have been approached by groups that are in the veterinary space, and I can say groups that actually have veterinary clinics where this could be mobilized relatively quickly. So I've taken 32 minutes of your time. That is the end of what I wanted to tell you. I'm very happy now to turn it back over for questions. And thank you very much for the turnout and for your attention.
Thank you, Jon. Perhaps you could stop your screen sharing now. And
Yep.
as Jon said, we will go through to questions. If you do want to ask a question, please type it into the chat box at the bottom of your screen. We'll try and cover as many questions as we can. We're going to start with one that came in before, and it starts off with, I'm conscious of the changes to the legislation on laboratory developed tests being proposed by the FDA and expect it may soon lead to more rigorous testing requirements in the US. Can you comment on how that's impacting you or how you think it might impact you?
Yeah, that's actually a very key question. I'm very glad that people are watching that. Where we are on this, so in 2005, the FDA gave guidance. That's what they've been doing. They give guidance about the use of LDTs, companion diagnostics, etc., into the market. And it's one of those things where they were really worried about this concept of homebrew LDTs. And what a homebrew LDT is it's somebody just, or a group, just grabbing onto the bandwagon of lab-developed tests and developing them in what we call a fringe way. And this happened actually with HER2 testing back there. And what's going on there for them is that those tests, they're not built to take advantage of basically what we call design control. And they're not built by doctors and pathologists looking at them and making sure that they really do perform the way they should. And I think it's actually really good that the FDA is looking at those things. However, what I've seen since 2005 around and around is that they do this and then they don't do it, and they do it and they don't do it. Let's just say that in 2024 or 25, this legislation, basically what it's all about, says that we're going to move LDTs under the medical device auspices that we have, and we're going to regulate them directly. That's not a bad thing for us, because the way that we build our LDTs is what I was taught to do at Ventana, which is following the IVD design control dossier concept. We already build those ourselves as a shadow to what we're doing. Now, what they've also said at the FDA is they're not going to grandfather anything in. And that's actually also good, because what it means, if you get grandfathered in, if you're already existing, well, we just take you as you are. But the whole point is to get rid of the ones that are homebrewed that actually are causing the problem. Our tests, with their very high metrics and the level of validation that we go to put them in the lab, using doctors like Dr. Heaton, who's our medical director, right, to stay to the standard that's published, allows us, if these regulations come in, to be able to very quickly pivot, give the right information, and continue in our business. Now, I will say that they're looking to phase this in about 4 years. They're saying 2028 before it's all phased in. We will have a massive, significant presence in the market by then, have the supporting information. So I think we're in a good place with it in a nutshell.
Okay, thank you. Got a question here on the PSE tests. I know the launch was recent, but given the size of the market, 144 PSE tests seems a bit disappointing. How rapidly do you expect this to leverage up?
Yeah, I get it, right? There's a discontinuity between, are we selling a widget or are we selling something that has to fit into the schema of how a doctor or doctors actually practice? And so, you know, if we were selling a widget, we just go out there and say, we got widgets for sale, come and get them. And yeah, you could expect things to go, ooh. That's not what we're selling. What we're selling is we're selling a test which fits into the stages that either the GP or the PCP in the US or the urologist have already established for the way they work up and look at their patients in terms of diagnosis and treatment. So if you think about it this way, they see a new patient and they go through step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and they're very prescribed and they're in the guideline, all the rest of it. What we're doing is we're now disrupting that to a certain extent and saying, well, your step 2, which is the PSA, which is 55% accurate, we've got something better. Well, I don't know if you've ever been to or the last time you went to a clinic to see a doc, but these medics are incredibly busy and overwhelmed. They don't have time to look at this and put it into the right place of their schema. So that's our challenge. That's how we have to go out there and start putting this in. The fact that just by direct to consumer, where we actually went 80% at the man in the US who needs to go to his doctor and say, hey, doc, I saw this, I need it, give it to me, and here's how you get it. Versus the doctor who looks at it and goes, well, that's fantastic, but how do I learn about it? How do I put it into my schema? That's what we're doing now. That's where, with the push of all the things that I've shown you that we brought Dr. Arrivo on board to do with the team, we'll start to get into those schemas and move that along. So you don't go from 0 to 60 on something like this in 6 months. It's going to take the time. But I agree with the person who asked the question. Massive market, massive potential, and we're on our way to capturing it.
I guess a follow-up to that is, when do you hope to be sufficiently confident to begin to put sales targets into the public domain?
Yeah, and that's another thing, you know, it's all right to see the potential. The markets have, since COVID and the headwinds that we've had around biotech are just all over the place, right? Now, I believe that as a chief exec, I would be remiss to put numbers out that were just fingers in the air at just probably never going to happen. So the answer to the question really is, when we have experience in the market and a foundation where we predict what it should look like going forward, I think is when we can reasonably be expected to put those sorts of guidance out.
Okay, thank you. Got a couple of questions on cost for the PSE. One is, what is the cost for the PSE test? And the similar question is, what is the cost for the PSE test in the insurance market? Yeah,
so, you know, we've actually gone ahead and done a couple of things with the PSE test, right? And it starts out as every test. And I'm sure that you've seen there's a lot of similarity how you sell PSE to the way you sell CERT, even though they're separate products. They're different cells, but there's a lot of similarities. So the first thing is starting with getting a CPT code and making sure that you can go to the insurers and say this has massive value, and this is what we're going to expect you to pay for it. The way that you underpin that so that you actually get paid for some of your value, because let's face it, everybody wants something for free, and it costs money to make tests and to keep companies running, right? So this is not
I think, John, you've just frozen there.
Do we all freeze?
You froze, John.
Just yourself, John.
Just you.
Where was the last part you me guys? Okay, so I'll keep going. So to get the correct value, we have to underpin that. And we've done that by doing the market research. And in the UK, where we're selling this test to private medical insurers or people through private medical, we're selling that test for £750. And that's very reasonable because there are other tests out there that are claim to do what we do that don't, that are selling for 500 or more. And when you think about the savings to the system, 750 is actually a pretty good place to be. What we've also been pushing is in the concierge and private markets in the US, a dollar equivalent to that to underpin where we need to land with the CPT code.
Okay, thank you. On the question of the labs, are the labs part of OBD or third party, and what is the capacity of the labs for PSE?
Yes. So just to get everybody on the same page, when we launched CERT, it didn't make sense to take the time or spend the money to build our own lab, and having experience with a partner lab from prior professional lives that was very good, we brought Next Molecular in Richmond, Virginia on board, validated the test with them, and that's how we've run the CERT test. What we realized with PSE is that we needed to have a much larger volume ability. And so we built, in parallel with bringing the test to market, our own clear certified lab up in Frederick. It has a capacity of 250,000 tests a year. And the nice thing about that is it's scalable in multiple ways. It's scalable such that with relatively low expenditure, we can expand it. The first expansion would take us to above 500,000 tests a year. And we will know when this stuff is coming. The other thing that it can expand into is it can be a backup if our CERT testing ever goes down. And it can also be a place to run pilot validations in the US for things like the colorectal or the vet med canine, as we keep going through the conversations with potential partners and collaborators.
Okay, and then just a follow-up on that, a question came in ahead of time. Is your plan to fill the internal capacity of 200,000 PSE tests, or even spend the additional $1.5 billion to expand the lab to a 600,000 capacity before linking with a large partner for higher volume?
So chicken and the egg, right? So I'd love to say absolutely not. But what that capacity represents to us is our insurance policy that if the national distribution engagement, et cetera, takes longer than actually getting those 250,000 coming through, we can still meet demand of the market, because the death knell for a company that can't meet demand, right? You just don't want to be there. We are, and that's why we've brought Dr. Aruvo in, very aggressively going after national distribution. And we expect it to happen. We can't predict when, so we're making sure that we can cover all bases.
Okay, a couple of questions on the finances. The company's raised 15 million in the last financial year. Sales of CERT are not currently bringing in any meaningful revenue, and overheads are high compared to cash. Given its size, is OBD capable of executing the CERT and PSE growth on its own?
So I think there's two people that should answer this. One of them's me, one of them's actually our CFO. For me, we can continue to raise or to monetize in a non-dilutive way. And I think that's obvious to everybody in the market. If we keep shoestringing ourselves, it'll take us 5 years to see the potential of what we're doing. But sure enough, we can do it, and we will do it. But I think there's a little bit more nuance there that I'll turn over to Paul, so he can give you a sort of an idea of what is really going on here.
Thanks, Jon. Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's a very good question. And I think there may have been another question before time, Alex, about cash. I think it's fair to say for anyone reading our results, you can see that we're not yet profitable or cash generative. So some additional funding, whether that comes from revenues, product revenues, project revenues, the kind of non-dilutive deals that Jon has mentioned as possibilities, or indeed further equity raises. So one or other of those sources of funding will be required, and that's not to sort of provide everyone with news that you will not already be aware of from looking at the numbers. So entirely valid question, but as Jon says, yes, we can do it. There's a question as to how quickly we do it, which is driven largely by the resources available.
And I think that there's a
Jon as well. You know, everyone sits in panic of fundraising. You know, the raise we did year and a half ago, we did it at a premium to the share price. We have got some incredibly supportive shareholders who see the OBD story. You know, they can see that they've got the vision, and you know, if we do get this non-dilutive funding in, they could be there as a stopgap. We have all these options open, and you know, we know, I know from conversations I've had today that all the big shareholders are very, very supportive, and you know, they can see as well as anyone else that there might be a need for a bit more equity fundraising, and I can say I think they'll be very supportive for that. Won't have to be done at a huge discount or anything like that. It's you know, we've built up relationships with these people over a very long period, and as I say, they really do share our vision and want it to really work. You know, here we are, a UK company fighting the big boys, but they really want this to work. And the one interesting thing is, as Jon alluded to it, is a couple of years ago, the questions were all about the technology. Does this technology work? It's actually a given now. You know, we've proven that, and it's just about the commercialization, and which is, you know, why it's so exciting. We have a bolstered up management team, and you know, we're going to get there.
Thank you.
So I would add that there's another nuance here too, and that is that we've almost been too successful in the product development and pushing the pipeline out of R&D into market ready. And as Matthew says, the appreciation of the platform and the technology is now starting to occur. But I think we've gone so far out in front in some ways that we're waiting for the rest of the market to get their head around it and catch up, whether it's the people, the clinicians that have these wonderful tests to use, but it's taking time for it to sink in and figure out how to use it, no matter how many times we harp on it, right? And even down to the R&D people, right? And everybody else in those chains. So part of it is we're a victim of our own success, but at the same time, man, what a success. So we're just going to keep doing it because it will all come together.
Question sort of linked to this whole sort of funding and these sort of tests you've got in development. Is your preferred outcome for the colorectal and the canine tests an upfront payment and a residual royalty per test?
So, you know, that's one of the blueprints for how this works. But I mean, reasonably, you know, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. We are absolutely thrilled that we've had third parties come to us and want to know about these tests, and it shows a lot of the things we've been talking about. We're in early confidential conversations. A lot of these people have agreed to go under NDA because we don't want people kicking the tires just to find out what we're doing, and then, you know, it's just a comp intel exercise, right? The other side of it is they've got a lot that they've got to go ahead and digest now that they understand what we do, what the potential of it is, that we're doing it with or without them. It's just that this stuff is available, right? And depending on that particular company's pipeline, agenda, sales strategy, a deal, we have no idea what the deals could look like. They could very well look like the cookie cutter blueprints that we've seen in other industries, or even diagnostic and pharma. They could be innovative and different, but I'm pretty sure that out of all the people sitting at the table, we're going to move to the next level and capture some value.
Okay, thank you. Bringing it back to the UK with a couple of questions. Do you envisage the PSE test being part of the Prostate Cancer UK Transform trial?
You know, that's a great question. And I don't do this very often but this is my notebook. This is my dossier on Transform and on screening in the UK and all those things. So let's talk about that Transform trial, right? It's being sponsored through Prostate Cancer UK, and it's a really, really timely initiative. You know, $42 million trial it's the biggest prostate cancer screening initiative in 20 years, and it's well past due, right? They've got the NHS, NHIR, and the UK government on board. There's £16 million already been pledged. You've got to look also at the fine details of what you're being told with some of this, right? So what they're trying to do is compare the most promising tests and provide definitive evidence of the best way to screen for prostate cancer. I'm reading that right off their information. And they're saying there's no national screening program. Okay, got it. But if you look at the matrix that I showed you about PSE, the real world evidence is already there. PSA has been being used for decades. Biopsies have been being done for decades. MRI has been being done for decades. Our test, as you see, enhances PSA, can slot in ahead of time, right? And we already have evidence through the prostagram trial that's actually been run by a lot of the overlapping people of how good it is. So if you look into more detail, they're not going to even start setting up Transform until spring of 2024, and they'll tell us more info. They will announce contracts once finalized. They're saying that men between 50 and 75 that have no previous cancer diagnosis are going to be signed up, and that multiple screening methods, including MRIs, will be used. What I can tell you is we've written to them so that they're fully aware of who we are, what we can do. We also have brought in the help of third-party government advocates who know us very well and understand our offerings to talk to them about how we must fit into this.
Okay, thank you. And again, a question linked to this. Can you say when the PSE test is likely to be available in the UK, both privately and through the NHS?
Right. So it's available technically in the UK right now. The technical part of it is the blood is taken and then shipped to the US, and we run it in the lab in the US. We have been building in the background the clinical medical testing ability in our Oxford facility. That's going through it, the validation and the proper regulation and compliance right now. And I can actually tell you, and I'm excited about this, that it should be online at the end of March, end of Q1, and we should be able to actually process those tests in the UK. The next step on that would be actually to validate into the cert as well, so that they can, now we will have the capability to do the testing for all of our commercial products in both places. And that will happen this year. In terms of the NHS, it's one of those things where it's a very ongoing situation. And I believe that those doctors that straddle the NHS and the private medical clinics in the UK are our best way to get into the mindset of the NHS so that they can see that there's something that's up, it's running, it works, it's in the hands of your own doctors. It's absolutely being used in the US. And I've said it many, many times, we're a British company. I'm British. I want this in the hands of the NHS to take care of the people in the UK that I love and we all know need help. But to get there, I've got to keep the company alive. I've got to focus on the major market, which is the US, but I've also got to keep on working in the UK to make sure it gets a foothold and it can become a mainstream thing.
Thank you. We've got 2 or 3 questions on the next topic, which is sort of, I guess, information to the market. And it's sort of around, you know, the PSE test numbers and the CERT test numbers could increase rapidly. Do you have any plans to publish quarterly or monthly updates on the figures?
So I think this goes back to what I said previously, you know, when there's something meaningful, absolutely. Right now, we're still, and I think we talked about, we're in that chasm, you know, of we've got it going, the engine is running, we're in 3rd gear. We've no idea what the market really looks like as we go into it. We can look at metrics about size and all the rest of it, but you think about it in terms of, you know, this is a racetrack. We don't even know which turns are coming up. We're ready for it. So what I'm really against as a CEO is giving out guidance, numbers, et cetera, that just aren't going to be real or have so many assumptions in them that they're not going to help anybody.
Okay, thank you. How are the various grant programs that OBD is on progressing, and are they leading to anything worthwhile? Likewise, are any of the large pharma programs we are associated with and other likes of Roche, etc., showing any interest in some sort of greater follow-ups?
Yeah, so this is actually linked into what I was saying about the third-party interest that we've had with these other tests, and the fact that we've put people under NDA to make sure they're not kicking the tires and just getting comp intel. And the reason for that is actually a lot to do with the experience that we've had with the agencies and the people in the consortiums we work with and with pharma. Because early on what we saw, and you saw this with some of our pharma contracts, people were very happy to come and work with us and give us contracts. But once they'd found out what we do, how we do it, and if it actually validates their agenda and their favorite biomarker, then they stop. Which is, again, going right back to why we said we're going commercial. We're taking our own destiny in our own hands. We're going to get these tests to doctors. Now, if people come back to us and they are serious about working with us, absolutely no problem. And I believe that as these LDTs get more and more traction and doctors are using it and they're going, well, what's going on with this back in pharma or in some of these research applications, that will start to push. And there's a couple of places where we've actually seen it. First of all, we are part of this large European UK consortium called Hippocrates. So it's looking into RA and psoriasis. And our data is really taking them by storm because adding that dimension, and we showed you this on the graph, that dimension that only we have contributes very significantly. That's why we're starting to see people like the Crick Institute and some of the other larger institutes start buying our arrays to generate their own data and get a look at what is this new modality and how can we use it. What we've also seen with the FNIH out in the US, which, as you know, is a consortium between the FDA, the NCI, the NIH, and 12 top pharma, is we're now on our second grant in order to establish what we're doing as a market leading technology and to answer very hard questions like hyperprogressive disease, etc. One of the reasons why on our pipeline we've brought NASH back onto it is because of the interest that we've had over the last 6 months from members of those steering committees of what else can you do, where do we need to go, etc. Right? So that is something where we're continuing to engage, but they've got to step into the space. Where we can really push is on our commercial side, which just keeps on giving them more and more and more reasons to jump into that space with us.
Thank you, Jon. There was a question, I think you covered this in the presentation, but just worth clarifying. Are the 770 cert tests quoted, is the figure for tests carried out since the 1st of October or in totality?
Well, it's in totality. I think we've put that one to bed.
Okay, thank you. Couple of questions here on competition. Are there any significant competition coming up for cert or for PSE?
There are always people that will claim that they can do things. When the numbers are
Jon, I think you might have frozen again.
I'm sorry. Okay, so I'll start again. Apologies. This transatlantic connections, you know. So I don't see that there are any significant players in the 3D genomics. We are first to market, and we've got the freedom to operate in the clinical space pretty much tied up. I don't see in other modalities that are trying to be, let's say, predictive, etc., for for checkpoint inhibitors, that they are getting even close. I don't see that anybody is ever actually going to be able to get a prostate test which is better than ours. And again, we're first to market, and we've got a really nice head start. But what I would is actually, this question is germane a little bit about the colorectal. You know, our colorectal test is fabulous, and in terms of the science and the metrics, head and shoulders above the market leader in the colorectal diagnostic sector, which is a stool test. And it's well known that a liquid biopsy, blood level, that could be moved upstream of a colonoscopy is something which would really build into a lot of people's pipelines. And that, I think, is why we've had that interest, is that people have recognized that. And there are even some people who've been in the market trying to build their own. And one company, the end of last year, I think it was August or September, read out a 20,000 person clinical trial with a prototype blood test that they were doing. And it failed. And so there's a large number of big companies that are well-resourced looking at, there's a gap in the market and it's total. And this little company's got the best test we've seen yet.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jon. I know we're close to time, but there are just two more questions I want to just try and cover, if we can do.
Okay.
And the first one is, what will OBD's margins be at scale for the CERT test and for the PSE test?
Yeah, so this is math, right? And actually not really math, it's arithmetic. Let's just say that our COGS, which I think we've talked about before, is $150 or less. And we sell a test for $1,000. Then that's a very close to 90% margin, right? As we go ahead and we sell it for $1,100, $1,200, $1,300, or in the case of CERT, the margins are huge. So, and they will continue to be huge.
Jon, I think
because they have value. And that's...
Jon, sorry to interrupt. I think you'll specify that's the PSE.
Sorry, Matt.
You'll specify that's the PSE, those margins.
So no, for CERT, the margins, right, are thousands of dollars above the COGS. So that's massive. And that's why we're underpinning the the PSE to also have a large margin because the COGS are very similar. So when I was at Ventana, we used to look at the margins. If we had a margin that was below 80%, we said, well, what are we doing, right? I know our margins for everything that we're doing are going to be already above that 80% level. And like I'm trying to express, when you get above 90%, 91, 92, it's just arithmetic, right?
Thank you, Jon. And the last question here is, the Bupa agreement is very good news. What are the plans for Bupa in 2024?
So Bupa is visionary, in my opinion, right? They are the first insurance company worldwide that has picked up on this and given it, private insurance company I'm talking about, right? Given it a coverage policy and a reimbursement. And they've put themselves out on the line with this, actually. They know that they can save considerably. But it's not about savings. What it's about is there's a certain pot of money that they can use or that they've earmarked for checkpoint inhibitor drugs with their patients. And because at most 30% of those patients will respond and the other 70 won't, what they need to do is they actually have to stop using it on the 70% of patients that it won't work on, right? Because once the whole pot is used, there's nothing for anybody else. So the other thing that's going on there, though, is that you can't mandate that you have to use this test, otherwise you can't use this drug. That would be perfect, but that's not the world we live in or necessarily the world we want to live in. However, what we're doing with Bupa is helping them to educate their doctors, to help them understand how to put it into the way they work their patients up. And we're doing a series of road shows this year with them, with their doctor groups, so that they can understand how easy this is to order. It's a simple blood test, and how it will help them direct not only the way to treat, but the best use of resources, so they're not turning people away come the second half of their year. And I think that that's a real challenge for them. We're there to help them with it. And I think that they're really courageous to have done that, because once they do it, a lot of other companies are going to look at it and go, oh, wow, we should be doing that too. And in fact, to that point, we do know that even without working with us for a coverage policy, at least one of the other large UK private insurers is paying for the cert test in the UK in certain places, depending on the coverage policy with the individual. So, yeah.
Brilliant, Jon. That's very helpful. I'm afraid we're out of time. That brings us to the end of today's webinar. Jon, maybe I'll just hand back to you if you'd like to just say a couple of lines of closing remarks before we exit today. And as you do exit, I'd just like to remind people that there will be an exit survey to complete, and be very appreciative if you could complete that. Thank you. So, Jon, just a couple of closing remarks.
Thank you, Alex. I think that the takeaway from today's webinar is that we are in a very strong position with the CERT test on the market, the PSE test on the market. We've brought very, very highly skilled, experienced people in to start pushing to that next level based on what we know about how to sell into these markets. We've built, I think, an amazing pipeline. We're seeing interest and market need really about this. And the outlook for the year, I think, is very, very good. We need to keep doing what we're doing. And I'm really bullish on this because people are waking up to what we can do, and not just what we can do for patients, but what we can do for them in their businesses. And that's when I think the tide turns and things really move for us. So thank you very much for your attention. I am, as I said, blown away by the number of people who signed up, and so looking forward to keeping going this year and building success on top of success.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Paul. Thank you to everyone for attending this Oxford Biodynamics full year results webinar. Thank you for all your questions. Apologies that we weren't able to cover all, but we tried to cover as many as we possibly could. And yes, thank you again, and we hope to see you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.